We're going to talk today about cannabidiol and its use of treating seizures. And we have somebody in town who knows a great deal about this on the basis of personal experience with his family. And he's going to talk to us today. And Tiffany's about to give the big formal introduction of Alex.
Sure, thanks, Mac. So today, as Mac had mentioned, we have Mr. Alexander Repetski with us. He became extremely interested in the medical marijuana extract cannabidiol as a medicine in late 2012. And while he became interested in that, he was investigating new therapies for epilepsy. So over the last 4 years, he's worked within the medical marijuana industry as a communications specialist. And continued his research independently in order to treat his daughter who has epilepsy. So today he'll be talking to us about cannabis as an emerging medicine. So welcome.
Let me get my notes here. Do I just press space to advance the slide?
Yeah, that or there's a slide advancer just next to the computer there if you want to
Oh, fancy. Hello, everyone. It's a nice day outside. Looking forward to better medicine, better weather coming, and better medicine coming. I'm not an accredited academic, researcher, doctor, or anything else, so I'm totally unqualified to be here. But as Tiffany said, I have spent the past 3 years investigating cannabis as a medicine and treating my daughter with great success. So I'm happy to speak about it with all of you. Luckily for me, I suppose, many years ago while at art school, I squeezed in a few biology and chemistry classes in between semiotics and photography. So I had a kind of a basis to understand the scientific lexicons that I've delved into over the past 3 years. I got made fun of a lot for being a nerd while in film school for doing that, but that was cool with me. So basically, I became interested in cannabis because my daughter got diagnosed with epilepsy at 4 months of age and was failing every treatment that there was. So I took it upon myself to research and understand what was going on to an extent, just so I could advocate for her and understand what the doctors and the neurologists were actually telling me. Along that path, I dove into a million different Google articles, some of which were totally bunk and some of which were totally valid and scholarly articles. And through that process came across cannabis and started reading about anecdotal reports and clinical trials dating back many, many years that cannabis could be an effective anti-seizure therapy. So I wanted to delve into it further. That's my daughter there. She's at the park right now and probably breaking something. So we'll get into a little patient overview. I spent many hours looking through neurology articles and learning about neuroscience. And again, I'm not a scientist, but I'm not totally stupid, so I can understand about 60% of it. And when I came across cannabis, I said, okay, this should be looked into. Shortly after that, that was December in 2012, I believe. Shortly after that, the whole CNN thing came out with Sanjay Gupta with a bunch of success reports and things like that. And I contacted those people, and it was really great that everyone was very willing to share information and help me learn. And it took me another, I guess, 14 months or so before we could actually access any high CBD cannabis here in Toronto. During that time, my daughter continued to fail very miserably tons of different anti-epileptic drugs. Um, she failed vigabatrin, ACTH, prednisolone, topiramate, valproic acid. The list goes on and on. We did a massive panel of genetic studies. She didn't have the markers for any specific epileptic condition like Dravet or Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, et cetera, et cetera. And the doctors were very vigilant. We were going for EEGs every, I don't know, 2-3 weeks. She was having, I don't know how many seizures, 30, 40 a day. And her EEG showed a constant subclinical seizure state. So she basically spent about 18 months from 4 months old till just over 2 in a state of seizures constantly, which I'm sure, as you can all imagine, left her completely developmentally stuck at 4 months of age. She couldn't, at 2.5, she could not crawl or walk or barely sit. And the next step was going to be the ketogenic diet, which has been proven effective, but it would also mean her having a G-tube installed. And at the time, basically the only thing she enjoyed in life was eating salami and cheese and other good yummy foods. So we weren't really too hyped about doing that. Of course we would if we needed to, if it would help, but I said to the doctors, let's try high CBD cannabis oil. And all of her doctors were very resistant. They've come around in a lot of ways now. But one of her doctors, after I lobbied him for probably 6 months with research papers and logical arguments and the fact that I was taking this very seriously, agreed to give us a prescription for cannabis for my daughter, who was then 2.5. And he was very clear with me, saying, I don't know how to dose this, I don't know how to process this. At the time, it was only available as a dried flower, and it was actually illegal to make it into oil. But there's lots of ways to do that, which we'll get into later. And, I said, fine, I'll take it upon myself. It's on me now. And kept reading, came across articles from, all kinds of different universities and different research in the States that gave me an inkling as to how much to give her of CBD and THC and what ratios and whatnot. So basically, until November of 2014, she was having constant subclinical seizures. Every EEG we did showed massive seizure activity, hypsarrhythmia. No matter how high they put valproic acid, no matter how much topiramate they gave her, no matter how much ACTH they gave her, nothing was helping. So I basically had gone completely crazy at this point, asking doctors, like, tell me what to do. I'll do anything to help her. If you want me to cut my hand off, I'll do that. And they all didn't laugh and said, that's not funny and it won't help. So as she kept failing treatments, I said, let's try this. And as I said, one doctor finally agreed to give her a prescription, and we ordered some cannabis. Now what? I had a big bag of cannabis, and obviously she was 2. She couldn't smoke. I don't want her to smoke. I don't want my kids to ever smoke, but it was also not a way to accurately dose in any way. So I wasn't totally ignorant to the cannabis plant. I had investigated it before for analgesic properties. I have really bad arthritis, as you can see from my deformed hands. And I had experimented it on myself for pain relief with some great benefit. But, you know, I don't know if any of you have kids, but your kid's health is, for me anyways, far more important than my own. So I decided to do some more research into how we could effectively extract the medicine, get it tested so we know the concentrations, and start on the treatment. So we did that in 2014. The marijuana for medical purposes regulations were instituted in 2013, which allowed us to access a high CBD strain of cannabis that was, you know, lab tested, grown in sterile facilities, versus the old program, which was the MMAR program, which allowed people to grow it for themselves or for others as a designated grower. In that program, I had many people say to me, "Oh, I can get you this, I can get you high CBD cannabis," but none of it was lab tested, so you know you couldn't really know what it was. Which is, you know, if you're medicating yourself as an adult, not that big a problem maybe, but for a child who can't speak, big problem. So I'm a fan of the MMPR program because it allows us to access relatively standard types of cannabis that we know the concentrations before we extract them. Until June of last year, it was actually illegal to make it into oil. So I was essentially a drug trafficker to my 3-year-old daughter, which was unsettling, on top of the fact that I was now basically, you know, acting as her doctor, which is, you know, a very strange dynamic because, you know, you have to be clinical, but also I just want to hug her and make her better. So there was a lot of strife in that sense, but what can you do? You got to do what you got to do. Doctors were very apprehensive. They didn't really want me to do that. There was no data on dosing other than what I found on the internet and from reputable sources, not from some guy on Reddit or something like that. And that's changed a lot. And, you know, obviously people like Dr. Burnham are very interested in learning and doing studies to advance this science now. So if I fast forward to now, there's Gwenny. She's looking for something to break. It's been a completely transformative treatment. She went from November 2014 having 30 seizures a day, constant subclinical seizure activity, failing every treatment, to I think the second or third day we started her on the cannabis oil, she had a seizure and she hasn't had one since. So she's now learned to walk, crawl if she wants, because she crawls upstairs. She's breaking stuff all over the place. Her brother, that's her brother Damien, he's for the first time in the past year getting to experience what it's like to have a sister. Whereas before he thought sisters just don't do anything, they don't bother you because she couldn't do anything. Now he's learning that, oh wait, she steals my food, she breaks my toys. So he's experiencing a sibling rivalry that he never, well, we feared he may have never experienced. Her EEGs now show no epileptic activity for the past year. She is still nonverbal. She faces many challenges. She's classified as developmentally delayed, but she's living a quality of life that's, I don't know how many thousands of percent improved than what she was before. So, I mean, it's been a really transformative therapy for her, and for a lot of other kids. The difficulty is that, you know, you're dealing with a plant that has a lot of variables, ratios of CBD to THC to CBN, CBG, et cetera, all the 68 or whatever, how many cannabinoids there are. So while the MMPR is standardized to an extent, you can't standardize the plant as thoroughly as you'd like to, because if you feed it at a different time, or you give it a little bit more light or water, or you harvest it 3 days earlier or 3 days later, it can change all these ratios. So the difficulty becomes maintaining a stable dose. And that's what I continue to try to do pretty much every day. And so there's her EEG results. That's before cannabis oil, and that's after. So I think it's pretty clear which one's better, even without seeing her have a seizure or anything like that. When we got the 40-day after EEG, she had 18 EEGs, I think, in 2 years, and I tried to become like a EEG specialist, where I could read them, but I'm not a specialist, so I couldn't really read them. So I would always be there when she had her EEG and take a photo, you know, afterwards someone would ask me, how was it, and I would always say, I don't know, because even though I'd see something that looked better to me, I wanted to reserve judgment for the tech to read it, because I don't really know what I'm looking at. I kind of know, but and there was many times before where I thought, I think it looks better, and it was not better at all. So this time, I thought it looked better. I still didn't say anything, and we saw her neurologist, one of her neurologists, I guess 4 weeks later, and they said there's no epileptic activity. And he was blown away, we were blown away. She was exhibiting like connectivity that we'd never seen before. So I gave the doctor a hug and we moved on. So there's a lot of research happening, as Dr. Burnham and I were just speaking about. The GW Pharma phase 3 findings were just published, and they were, I think, it's on a slide coming up, but I think it was like a 36%, showed an 80% improvement or something relatively huge. There's lots of Canadian institutions interested in the research. There's geneticists, Dr. Jonathan Page out in Vancouver, who are mapping cannabis genomes so that we can, instead of relying on indica versus sativa versus high CBD, high THC, we can actually look at the genetic structure of the plant and then determine what we think it will do based on that, as well as correlating that to human genotypes, so that we can try to find out if, you know, this strain might work better for this genetic variant versus that genetic variant, et cetera, et cetera. Doctors are becoming far more open-minded now, which is great. They're seeing good results and some, you know, some less good results. I was actually speaking to one of my daughter's neurologists the other day, who was saying that they've seen some parents doing the same thing as we're doing, but not without good results. And I think the problem with that is that some people are trying to use the treatment without doing all the lab testing and the other kind of investigational reporting that we're doing. And it's onerous and it's expensive, but I felt that the only way to do this was to be as clinical as possible about it. Whereas some people are just saying, okay, give them some of this, and it's not working. And her doctor feels that may be because, you know, they're not maybe getting it tested, and that's not their fault. We need the real researchers and scientists and doctors to do the studies so that it's not upon a parent or a patient to try to figure it out themselves, because it's, as I said, a very onerous task. Luckily, I've had the time and resources to do it to some degree, and so we need to do some more research. This is a paper from 2009, I believe, quoting Dr. Meshulam, who's an Israeli doctor who isolated THC in 1963, I think. Yeah, 63, and also defined CBD and a bunch of other cannabinoids within the cannabis plant. So since then, there's been a lot of research done explaining why cannabis, whether it be THC or CBD or CBN or whatever else, interacts with the human body because of the endocannabinoid system. So really, what we need to do moving forward, I guess, is better understand the exact chemical compound, dosing, interactions, and all that kind of thing, which is what Dr. Burnham's going to do. This is just a screenshot of the GW study that was done in New York. Now, they're using 20 milligrams per kilogram per day. This is purified CBD. There's no THC in it at all. That doesn't really correlate to what I found effective in terms of dosing per pound or kilogram. It doesn't mean it's wrong. We don't understand that. Is there a catalyst effect of the THC and the CBD mixture? We don't know, but hopefully we'll find out. So now we get into kind of some fun chemistry stuff. There's tons of ways to extract cannabinoids from the plant into an oil or balm or cream or whatever else you want. There's infusion, which is basically just taking the flowers, putting it in oil, and boiling it for 12 hours. It's not very efficient that way in terms of concentration, but it works. There's butane extraction, ethanol extraction, supercritical, water-based extraction, solventless extraction. Like there's something called rosin extraction, which is kind of new, which is literally just taking two hot plates and pressing a flour and just squeezing the resin out of it. Apparently, it's actually a very efficient way to do it, and it's a very clean way to do it because there's no solvent. Once you've extracted them, you can put up. You could smoke or vaporize the oil if you want to. You can put it into MCT oil, avocado oil, olive oil, pretty much any fat soluble substance it will kind of homogenize with. I've done a lot of different methods. I've done the infusion, butane extraction, ethanol extraction. I've never done the supercritical CO2 extraction because those machines are like $200,000 and I was about $199,900 short. So I skipped that one. This is basically what it looks like to do an alcohol extraction. You're basically getting 94% alcohol, putting the crushed up flour in a jar, pouring it in, letting it sit for between 5 and 30 minutes, and then straining it. The alcohol soaks all the cannabinoids out of the cannabis, and then you strain it, and then you either let the alcohol evaporate or boil it off, which is a little dangerous, but what can you do? Funny story, actually. You can't buy 94% pure alcohol in Ontario. You can get it in the States, you can get it in Quebec, but you can't buy it here. So I called the LCBO and said, I need 94% alcohol. I don't want to drink it. I'm making herbal tinctures for medicine. And they said, no, you can't have that. And then I sent an email to their quality assurance department and got an email back saying, you can't have this unless you have a doctor's prescription. And my daughter's doctor had said, look, I've given you a prescription for cannabis. I'm not writing a 3-year prescription for boobs. So I sent them an email back saying, no, you don't understand. I really need this. They said, you have to be a compounding pharmacist or a researcher. I said, okay, well, I'm not technically any of those things, but I really need it. And I said, I needed to make marijuana oil for my daughter. And they said, oh, you need it for marijuana oil? Okay, no problem. And they sent me the letter of authority. So I went into the store and I got it. And I've been experimenting with this and the infusion and the butane extraction. And they all produce similar results. This is a picture of a closed loop butane extraction machine that I had built for me. And it's basically a canister of butane, a reclamation pump, and a vacuum pump. The butane gets pushed in here where the cannabis is contained, and then it soaks, and then you open a valve, and it all comes down here. You purge it, and all the butane gets sucked out, and you're left with a canister of this cannabis resin. It's a really messy, sticky, gooey job. But so all these different ways of processing it end up with a similar result. You end up with a resin, which then needs to be homogenized in some way into a carrier so you can test it, and then you can attribute the concentrations and dosing. So after I scrape it out of here or get it out of the jar or boil it off, you basically end up with this, which is a pure cannabis resin. And this is a very high CBD strain of cannabis. That is 22 grams of resin or shatter or whatever else you want to call it. And that took about 120 grams of dried flower to make in the butane machine. Then you put it into, in this case, this was a coconut oil. You decarboxylate it, and that's a totally different subject. There's actually just a study done that showed that CBD gets decarboxylated just from stomach acid, which is something that I've just started to read about. So before a cannabinoid is decarboxylated, it's an acidic cannabinoid, and it's generally considered not effective in that acidic form. So this study is now showing that maybe THCA or CBDA does get decarboxylated to return to its active component just in gastric acid. And they were using synthetic acid and synthetic cannabinoids, so it's not in any way, shape, or form proof, but it's something that needs more looking into. Just another hook in the loop, I guess. So after you end up with your resin and processed oil, you don't have to, but I always send it to the lab because it's the only way to accurately figure out how much of each cannabinoid is in there. So I test for THC, CBC, CBD, CBG, CBDV, and THCV and CBN. There are many more cannabinoids, but this panel cost me $1,200. To expand even more would cost me $3,000, and I was $1,800 short. So as you can see, sample 1 is 1.3 milligrams per milliliter of THC, 13 milligrams per milliliter of CBD, and 5.36 milligrams per milliliter of CBDA, which is the acidic form. And then I have other samples of 0.9 to 20.6, 2.8 to 22.2, all the way up to 1.8 milligrams of THC and 54 milligrams of CBD. So you've got a 30-to-1 ratio, 20-to-1 ratio, a 12-to-1 ratio, and the list goes on. So the goal is to keep a steady ratio. What we found for my daughter anyways, and a lot of other people have found effective, is 19 to 21 to 1 CBD to THC. So we've been trying to keep that ratio the same while maintaining a specific dose per kilogram, which, as you can see, I mean, these are all I mean, this sample and this sample were from the same strain. But because of the variables in growing it, the ratio was different. So it's very difficult to maintain a specific ratio and dose. So what we've turned to doing is combining different strains to, 0.3 of this and 0.6 of this equals this to maintain that ratio and the dose per weight. So it's it's kind of confusing because it is an herbal medicine. So it's not like, if you buy a Tylenol or something, you always know it's the same exact thing. The good news is that licensed producers are now developing labs that can do the work for us and test it so that hopefully a standardized formula will become available very shortly. This one here is from a producer, and it's exactly as stated. So that was really good news. So these are some trichomes here. I took this photograph last week at someplace. Legal place. I mean, these trichomes contain all the medicine. And if you ask someone who's experiencing growing marijuana, they'll tell you if it's cloudy, it's this, if it's clear, it's that. And it's all true. But the science needs to be advanced to a point where not only can we say like, oh, because this one's clear and this one's getting cloudy, it's ready to harvest. We need to be able to say very specifically for other reasons that it's containing X, Y, or Z, different cannabinoids, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to continue to decipher the medicinal values of the plant, not just for epilepsy, although that's obviously the only thing I've been focusing on. I've also been experimenting with oils for pain relief for myself, and it's very effective in some regards in that sense. But obviously, I think it holds a huge amount of promise for the treatment of seizures, as I've seen in my daughter, who literally was like a vegetable 2 years ago, and now she's running around and, while still delayed, doing a lot of normal kid stuff. She spills everything, she breaks everything, like stuff that normally people would complain about, but I clap at because she couldn't do it before. I think it's very interesting that along this journey that I've undertaken to learn about this, there's almost like a crowdsourcing of information. So there's tons and tons of people who have been looking at cannabis for 10, 20, 30, 40, however many years. Most of them have been doing it kind of under the radar, out of the system, because the system was very prohibitive. So I've always found it's been very interesting to speak to people who are very knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than myself about it, who are not a doctor or not a scientist. They're just a guy who's been growing weed for 30 years and just observing the results. So it's a very interesting culmination, I suppose, where now that knowledge is kind of intertwining with the proper academic and medical community, and I think it will, very soon lead to a very clear understanding of why cannabis helps specific conditions, specifically why CBD is effective at treating seizures, and hopefully very soon we'll find a time where the appropriate research has been completed and we can treat people in a safe and effective manner without having to, have patients figure it out all for themselves. And that's really it.
Before you begin the question period, I'm going to ask if you have questions or if you hear questions from the audience, if you could repeat it but kind of stand closer to the mic, just to ensure that everyone that's online can hear you.
Okay, we'll
So
do
if you
it.
could, yeah, stand closer to there. That would be great. Closer
Okay.
to the monitor. Yeah. Thank you.
Simply to say, I've sat with Alex on panels, and I thought you would like to hear him. It was really parents that brought the ketogenic diet back, and it's parents that have been really leading the charge on bringing medical marijuana back into action. So at this point, many questions, but let's just see what we have questions from the audience. Anybody want to kick off? Dr. Cortez.
Thank you very much for sharing all these experiences.
Thank you for allowing me to do so.
It's very remarkable story, and I really connected with that. As a parent, I would do the same. We got a frustration with the system in Canada. My question to you is whether you notice any improvement in sleep function of the daughter.
And sorry?
Sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah, the consolidation of sleep at night, or whether she's better, or then how cognitively she get advanced after the CBD.
So, in terms of sleep, we haven't really noticed a difference. She doesn't sleep that well, which is, from what I understand, generally a common disturbance with epilepsy. In terms of cognitive abilities, huge improvements. I mean, she's still delayed, but she's gone from literally almost a vegetative state to now, a year and a half later, walking around. She couldn't crawl, she couldn't sit before. She watches TV, which, you know, was nothing. She makes eye contact, she communicates. She's nonverbal, but she communicates with us with sounds and emotions to tell us if she's hungry. She's starting to use sign language, like more for food. So I wouldn't say we've seen any difference in sleep patterns really, but in terms of cognitive improvement and connectivity, huge, dramatic, very dramatic improvement.
I think Dr. Thompson had a hand up.
Yeah, this is actually a related question in a sense. Also, the therapeutic index for CBD is favorable. So this is related to toxic dose versus therapeutic dose. And one side effect, potentially high dose, is sedation. Lowering certain sleep be relevant to sleep in a beneficial way. Seen any evidence of these side effects?
Question is, do you see side effects?
Yeah, I mean, the main side effect is not having seizures, which is a good one. She's very hungry a lot, which we don't know if it's just because she's a 3-year-old and she really likes eating, or if it's because of this. It's hard to say because she was on so many drugs before, like that were appetite suppressants as a side effect. So it's very hard to say. We've weaned her off. When we started, she was on topiramate and valproic acid, and she's basically completely weaned off topiramate and almost weaned off valproic acid. So it's very hard to say if I could see a side effect in the appetite. In terms of sleep, it's kind of in flux. So there's been times where a batch came back like slightly higher THC, and then we felt that she was sleepier, and it wasn't that she was getting a lot of THC, but a little bit more than before. But in general, if we keep when we keep her at the baseline of that ratio, 1 to 19, 1 to 21, I wouldn't, we're not experiencing somnolence or anything like that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
We have a question from the ether.
Yes, so there's a couple online questions. We'll start with one from Sam. The question is, how far away do you think oil is from coming on the market, and at what cost roughly?
Oil is on the market now. there's, I think, 3 or 4 licensed producers that are selling pre-manufactured oil. One I can mention is a bottle of 1,200 milligrams of CBD. It's a 1:20 ratio, and it's $129, I think, for, I think it's a 90 milliliter bottle, which contains 1,200 milligrams. So if you want to break down the cost, I mean, my daughter Gwenevere is 32 pounds. She would need of that about 2 bottles a month, so call it $300 a month. And obviously, if you weigh 180 pounds, a lot more.
Dr. Zach.
Follow that question. So to obtain the oil, do you need a prescription or do you need?
Yeah, so under the current regulations, you need a prescription from a doctor. The doctor can write a prescription for dried flower or oil or both. If it's for dried flower, for example, and they say 1 gram a day, the licensed producer has to do like a calculation of how much oil is 1 gram a day. So it's all accessed right now legally via a doctor's prescription, and you order it and get it through the mail, whether it's oil or flower. That may change in August when the Supreme Court has mandated that the MMPR basically be rewritten. I don't think a lot will change, but what it may do is allow people to grow their own cannabis up to a maximum of X amount of plants, which a lot of people are hoping for in lots of different communities, but we don't know if that will change or not. But for now, yeah, you need a doctor's prescription, and then you can order it.
Second issue regarding any interaction of this compound currently used anti-epileptic.
Does it change levels of other
Yeah,
drugs?
there's a lot of interactions. I think it's cytochrome P450 metabolizes cannabis, as well as I think many other drugs. So, you know, I'm not going to get into specifics because I don't want to misquote anything, but there's definitely a factor of interaction, not really contraindication, but for example, introducing cannabis oil could raise levels of another anti-epileptic drug.
I think traditionally they say that acute cannabis tends to raise levels of other compounds, but chronic cannabis tends to lower them. It's like alcohol. It's a blocker short term, and then it's an inducer.
So my initial relation to this one is you can use as added the drug in addition to the standard anti-epileptic drug. Is that the same or?
Dr. Quang has a question.
I missed your presentation, so I can answer any questions. If memory serves, it was a 4-year-old child in Denver whose mother started giving the child CBD.
Yeah, you're probably talking about Charlotte. I know that.
And you went, I guess viral is the wrong word, on the net.
Yeah.
I can understand you've got intractable pain, chronic pain, and you have periapical array with receptors or cannabinoid receptors that mediate central pain. How do you think it works in that place? What are we binding? What are we stopping?
Maybe you can answer that.
Let me take that one.
I'm not a doctor.
When the question is how can cannabidiol work, and it's a great question. There are a number of different proposed receptors, 5-HT1A,
Serotonin.
yeah, TRAP-V1, which is a sodium channel, adenosine receptors, the mysterious GBR55. And the answer is, I don't think any one of them is established. We don't know its receptor. None of the proposed receptors would have, I believe, the dramatic results that we see in some families. Should say it's not a wonder drug. It doesn't work for everybody, but for some families, it's just a miracle. There is a question from the ether again.
Yes, so there's actually a few questions from Jason. So the first couple questions are what dose is Gwen on, and what anti-seizure medications does she still take?
So she is weaned off almost all anti-seizure medications. She was on a super high dose of valproic acid. It was 3.3 milliliters 3 times a day when we started. She's now going down to 0.1 milliliter. So she's almost off it. We've been weaning her very slowly because we didn't want to get into any withdrawal seizures and stuff like that. Her dosage is approximately 2.3 milligrams of CBD per pound per day. And we're varying that a little bit. As I was explaining to Dr. Burnham, we're trying to keep the CBD intake at the same, but lower the THC even more and see if it has any effect.
It's interesting, that's about a tenth of what Repetski used in the trial, the GW trial.
Which had no THC.
Which had no THC.
So there's one more question again from Jason. Can you comment on hemp versus MMJ, which I assume is medical marijuana?
Yeah, so
Sorry, and whether CBD hemp should be under MMPR regulations?
well, I mean, quite frankly, I think CBD hemp and CBD medical marijuana, MMJ, should be declassified because it's still very onerous for people to access in many regards. That's not to say it should just be like free and wild, but in terms of the difference between the two, I can't truly comment. I mean, something like hemp is classified by 2 things as far as I understand. A, it's not derived from flowers usually, and B, it's under 0.3% THC. So I can't really comment on whether one or the other is more efficacious. What I can say is that hemp is, I mean, it's the same plant, really. So in theory, if the cannabinoid profile is the same, they should be, give or take, the same effectiveness.
There's another question. If there's
Go ahead.
So Sam online, I think this is similar to Dr. Thompson's question, but what side effects have you noticed other than positive? So you mentioned a bit of it before.
Really nothing. I mean, unless hunger is part of it, which I can't say because kids get, like my 5-year-old son is hungry one day and not the next, and so I really haven't noticed anything. No.
I could maybe follow that up. The one side effect that you seem to see when you had high THC was a little bit of somnolence, I guess, a little bit of sleepiness, you thought?
Yeah, when we've had certain dosages that were higher in THC, we believed we saw a little bit of doziness, dopiness, somnolence, whatever you want to call it.
Here's a real question that I'd like to ask. We're hopefully starting animal trials in about a month, and human trials probably next fall. And we're going to use placebo, we're going to use pure CBD, but then there's a feeling that a lot of people have that some THC improves things. And I think you feel that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I've never experimented. Unfortunately, I'm experimenting on my daughter, which is a really uncomfortable thing to say, but I've never given her a pure CBD product, so I can't say for certain, but a lot of people think that a small amount of THC acts as like a catalyst to uptake the CBD more effectively. Whether that's true or not, I mean, I can't really say because I haven't tried her, and although I'd like to see the difference, it's a little bit scary to change her from something that I know is working to something that might not work as well. So maybe we'll know, or maybe I won't know. I don't know.
Dr. Zhang. No, it's pretty complicated. If you smoke it, you get higher bioavailability. If you eat it, you get lower. I don't really understand why. When they inject it, it becomes active after an hour to 2 hours, which confuses me. but the peak activity is certainly after an hour and before two in animals, and fat soluble compounds usually are active in 5-10 minutes. So it's the pharmacokinetics are complex, and Harold Calant knows a lot about it if you want to follow this up. Another question.
You kind of already touched upon this, but just to ensure that the question's addressed. So Sam asks, are you aware of any clinical trials here in the GTA? Which you mentioned, Matt, but you might want to speak to it a bit more.
Hasn't started yet. We hope to start a clinical trial in adults in probably with luck September if things are good. That's the only trial I know that's ongoing in actually Canada at this point. The people at Hospital for Sick Children are trying to promote a pediatric trial in Dravet syndrome, but I don't think have got a start point yet.
Orange Rincy is doing a trial in NYU in New York.
Yeah, that is.
I think it's published in the abstract form.
Yeah, we in a way we have a problem with the Davinsky trial and the GW approach. They've got it with orphan drug status. They're testing it on Dravet syndrome, which is rare, and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is relatively rare. And they essentially are trying to produce a prescription compound, which will probably be very expensive. Now, I don't just want to see it used by children. If it's effective, I'd like to see everybody doing it. And I don't know why it should be so very expensive. I would really like to see it something that was cheap and easily available and used by everybody who needs it.
So quick point on that is, I mean, part of the cost associated with products out of the current regulatory framework is, based on the security that's very vigilant, the quality assurance, which, is very vigilant. These are all very important. I think a real way to bring costs down would be to grow it in open fields, because part of growing cannabis for people who want to smoke it is the smell, the taste, and the look. If you're growing a cannabis plant that's only purpose is to be made into oil, you don't need to worry about how it's groomed or how it looks or how it smells, because like my daughter doesn't care about that, and epilepsy patients don't care about that. The other thing is that in terms of purity and all kinds of different testing that they do for pesticides and things like that, molds, etc., is all very important. But once you start extracting it, like when you extract something in a supercritical CO2 machine, any mold is killed by that process. So I think a really good way to get this into a large scale availability at a low cost is grow it in an open field and process it all into oil. And you don't have to worry so much about is it dense, is it cute, does it smell good? It's immaterial. We're only concerned about the actual cannabinoid compounds within.
Hey, simply question off topic. People think that cannabidiol might be good for other things. One of the possible things it might be good for is pain, but I don't know of any good evidence. Do you have any idea of whether it's useful for pain?
I do actually. I've used it myself for pain and inflammation. There's been a couple studies about whole plant cannabidiol for inflammation that proves its efficacy, as well as, there's studies about endometriosis going on, all kinds of different things.
But would this be THC that's analgesic, or would it be CBD?
Well, I think the studies are showing that THC has a more analgesic effect, and CBD has an anti-inflammatory effect.
Okay.
So, in my experience, I'm a licensed patient as well. The best thing for my pain, and it's considerable, is a cannabis with, instead of 20% CBD and 1% THC, it's 10 and 10.
50/50, really.
Right, and in
Okay.
general, the high, the euphoric effect of THC is somewhat combated by the intake of CBD. So by using an oil that's produced with a 50% of each, you get both analgesic and anti-inflammatory, and you don't really get the psychotropic effects if it's dosed properly.
Yeah, let me just follow that up. There's arguments in the scientific community. You're saying that CBD essentially decreases the psychotoxic effects of THC.
Some people would argue that,
But
um,
you think that might be true?
Well,
I've seen it argued back and forth.
yeah. So in my experience, I mean, I smoked some weed in university and high school, but I didn't really like it. It was never my thing. In recent years, I have begun using it because I saw how it helped my daughter, and I thought, I have really bad spine pain all the time, so I'll try this. So I've been using oil produced. It's on one of the slides from cannabis plant that's like 9% CBD and 8% THC, I think, and it doesn't produce any effect psychologically. Now, that's not to say it wouldn't if you took a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
We've run our hour. The talk today has been, and to thank Alex for really, really very nice.